What a great day for the zoo! Hey guys, Kingpin here. Welcome to the H2O Zone, and welcome to Franchise Mode. In case you missed the very last episode, we actually tried a new little series called Speed Builds. A little less commentary, a little less edits, but the flamingo exhibit that we made turned out even better than our normal exhibits. I'm a huge fan of it. The main reason we decided to build it over here was to take some of the stress, literally, off of our Arctic foxes. If you've seen any episode in the series, you know that's been a consistent issue. If you didn't watch that video, I'd highly recommend going back to it, because we actually figured out a way to get a lot more plants and foliage in the flamingos exhibit than they're usually more comfortable with. We used null barriers and a little bit of game exploits to do it. We also made the flamingos' interior section available from the water or land, depending where they happen to be. Moving on past our greater flamingos, you'll reach the California sea lion exhibit. I'm a huge fan of how this one turned out. It's technically not underground at all, although this little building that we added gives the illusion that it is. It looks like one of the sea lions is getting in the water now. This is a great view of them as well. I'm pretty sure there's 4 or 5 of them in here at this point. There's definitely 3 adults, 1 male and 2 females, which is what we started with, and there's definitely a baby too. They had offspring in the last episode. The California sea lion enclosure is home to our zoo's one and only outside animal talk show. I'm a really big fan of how this turned out, especially how we matched the colors of the bleachers with the colors of our zoo, being white and blue. That rhymed. After you exit the talk show area, you'll then go down this ramp to the actual underground viewing portion of the gray seal. And if our fruit bats could just chill for a minute, that would be great so we can finish the intro. I don't really think any of them are out right now, so we'll see if they're out in their above ground viewing. You'll climb up this ramp instead of down this time, and then you'll be able to see them on their pier. And it looks like all of them are enjoying basking in the sun. There's 3 babies in here, and I believe 4 adults, 3 females, and a male. After paying our gray seals a visit, you'll then go back down this other ramp, and then you'll be in the bulk of the North American section. Starting off with the raccoons, if you'll pass that, you'll eventually be in the Timberwolf Caves. Inside the Timberwolf Caves, you have their indoor viewing with one-way glass, and the Fruit Bat Cavern. Typically, this is the part in the video where I would go over the rough plans of what we're going to be building today. However, I wanted to challenge myself, and I didn't really make a plan for this build. I kind of completely winged it. We're going to be building for the North American beaver today, so obviously there's a few things we're going to want in this exhibit. We're going to need hard shelter for them first and foremost. They surprisingly need a lot of it, despite not being very big at all. Due to this, the first exhibit feature we're going to be adding is a den for underground viewing. It'll have one-way glass, so they're not going to know we're there, so they don't get stressed. The other thing that I know for a fact that we are going to add in this exhibit is underwater viewing. It's the theme of the zoo, the H2O zone. We have to deal with a lot of water. Beavers are animals in Planet Zoo that require deep diving, which means you have to have at least 4 meters of water for the areas where they require deep diving, and they need about 100 square feet of it. I accomplished this by using the subtract terrain feature and making it subtract 2 meters of the dirt. The reason I'm using 2 meters of dirt to subtract instead of 4 is because the glass is also going to be 2 meters tall above the path. So if you take the 2 meters of dirt that's subtracted and add the 2 meters of glass that's going to be above the dirt, that totals 4 meters. If the water's at the top of this glass, that's 4 meters, which is the exact amount the beavers need to deep dive. I didn't want to give them a gigantic pit, because they're not great swimmers like our sea lions, seals, or even king penguins. They are good swimmers, however they don't spend a majority of their life in the water like our other species, so they didn't need a huge tank. Aside from the pathing system, which will forever be the most janky thing in this game, the most finicky thing from my experience in Planet Zoo is actually placing water and making it valid. The easiest way I've personally found to do this is by using 2 materials. One, obviously glass. This is so you can have see-through domes, you can have underwater viewing, you need glass to do water. in a majority of exhibits in this game. That's a given. But the other block type, or I guess barrier type in this case, that I enjoy using to make these underwater exhibits is actually the concrete. I don't necessarily think concrete looks great on its own, however if you pair it with glass and have the concrete jutting into the wall and the terrain so that you can actually fill up the pool, the concrete is really easy to blend into rocks since it's also gray and be colored however you want it. After I got the rough outline of their pool done, I then decided to use the Add Terrain feature and add the terrain relatively close to the height of their pool, and then use Flattened Foundation and Smooth just to completely smooth everything out and blend it in seamlessly. The beavers are going to need a little river into their exhibit later, however we'll worry about that at a different time. For now we just want to get the absolute rough outline of this place done. The next thing we have to do, unfortunately, is the paths. I decided to try and build a guest viewing area made of things that are off the grid. Typically when I build, I only build on the grid, but I decided this time to challenge myself, because from what I've seen and heard from other YouTubers, you can actually build much more complicated and detailed structures when you're off the grid, so I left a small area to work on that later. I also decided to add a small little shortcut right here. The beaver's underground den viewing is going to be to the left of this, so I decided to add this shortcut in case you just didn't want to see that. If the beavers aren't in there, then it would be pointless to walk all the way around it. After I made that little shortcut, I then decided to work on the beaver's river. Beavers hate running water. It actually really hurts their ears, which is one reason why beavers like to build dams to stop the water from running. They also live in the dams to protect them from predators, but we'll learn all about the beavers later on in the video. They're a fascinating animal. However, I couldn't figure out how to get the water to flow into it, so I decided to come back later and just use the special effects. It turned out really nice though. You're not going to want to miss that. Out of any video I've ever made, this one's probably my favorite, and this exhibit definitely turned out well, so I highly encourage you stick to the end of this video to check it out. Because spoiler alert, unless I spoil it in the thumbnail, who knows, I ended up making a decision late into the build process that really changed this build, and you're gonna like it. The final thing I did, in just the rough outline of this build, was actually get rid of the path and do it all again. And no, I haven't gone crazy, I just wanted to get the path as close as possible to the beavers. In case you forgot, I mentioned before that the North American beaver in this game requires a decent amount of hard shelter. If you don't know what hard shelter is in Planet Zoo, it can pretty much be defined as if it rains, the animal won't get hit by the rain. So hard shelter doesn't necessarily have to be quote-quote hard shelter as in a building. It can be a cave too, which is actually what we're going to be doing today. In real life, beavers don't live in caves, they typically live in dams. However, that's going to be a nightmare to deal with traversable area, so the dams we're going to be constructing in the exhibit are just going to be for show. They're not actually going to be functional. It's just going to be a bunch of birch leaves, birch sticks, and a bunch of tree trunks kind of on their side to give the mock impression that the beavers have taken down the river and flowing water, which is what they like to do in real life. On paper, the indoor viewing section of the beaver should have been an extremely easy build, but in execution, I decided to make this the most complicated thing possible. Funny how that happens from time to time. Anyways, what I decided to do for this build was pretty much the exact same technique that I used to make the beaver's underwater viewing. I used the Subtract Terrain feature just to get a little bit off the ground, and then I used the Add Terrain feature to build around it. After that, I realized that I didn't subtract enough terrain because when I flattened to the surface, our walls weren't big enough and it was connecting the floor to the ceiling, which obviously this isn't underground viewing at that point, that's just a mountain. After this slight misstep and miscalculation, I decided to use the pull feature to extend the barriers of the little mountain ridge we've made, and then use the push feature to lower the ground even further. I then used the flatten terrain feature to get it all smoothed out. Eventually, I gave up. We'll come back to this part later. I then decided to use the null barrier to get all the way around the exhibit to see exactly how much land we were working with. And after I did that, I began construction on our guest viewing. I'm a huge fan of how this turned out, and I'll explain the process now. Pretty much what I started with was using these wooden beams to cover up the ugly area of the glass where the panels connect. I then took these beams and multiplied them so we could get them exactly apart from each other. To do this, hold down the A button on Xbox. I'm not familiar with what button it would be on PlayStation, but with the equivalent of the A button. Then use the advanced move and duplicate feature and just move them back on the X-axis however far you want them. This will get them perfectly spaced. I then took some European rock from the construction menu and I made sure it was the one off the grid. I then used the X-axis again to get these completely straight, going through the beams that we just placed. If you're struggling to build, or at least struggling to make your buildings look good, I would assume that you're not using the advanced movement menu enough. It is by far the easiest and best way to make your builds look good. Another thing you might not be doing is using your builds with actual geometry in mind. If you've ever taken a geometry class in real life, 15 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, they make a lot of sense why you had to use those numbers so much in those classes. I can't really explain it here, we're not a math channel, we focus on biology, but just know, knowing basic geometry legitimately helps in building in Planet Zoo. The other thing that legitimately helps in building in Planet Zoo is not being afraid to try new things. Use trial and error. Try a piece that you've never used before. If you don't like it, hit the Y button on Xbox, again I don't know PlayStation, and get rid of it. Don't be afraid to try new things, and if you don't like how it turns out, simply get rid of it. It's easy as that. If you want an example of trying things out and getting rid of it if you don't like it, put this into perspective. That line you just listened to, that probably 10-second recording, probably took me 5 minutes to record because I kept stuttering and fumbling over my own words. This build is incredibly basic, but sometimes the most basic builds actually end up looking the best. I'm a huge fan of how these spaced out logs turned out. We come in later with some mesh and leaves to make it complete. Typically I do most of the big building in time lapses like you guys probably just saw a 10-minute time lapse of, maybe closer to 7 or 8 depending on how much I cut, but I decided now to do this in real time. Usually I don't do this, but I've gotten a few comments in the past few videos that say, slow the videos down a little bit, take your time. And I read every single comment that you guys leave, so I take that to heart, so thank you guys for the advice. If you guys have any other questions or anything else you'd like to see in this series or videos, leave a comment, I'll respond to everyone. Pretty much what we're trying to do now is just dig this out a little bit. We want to have a good indoor viewing of the beavers, but at the same time, be able to see them and not have them crushed by the ceiling. So to do this, we're going to be trying to use the flatten to terrain feature, using it on the ceiling and the ground. Let's see if we can't get it a little bit. But yeah, terrain generation in this game, or I guess it's not really generation, but molding can be a little bit finicky. I have my sensitivity up relatively high, and this is mainly to get a few kind of interesting angles and hit the ground from a really hard angle and then like leave it. It's hard to explain, I can't really do it in live commentary per se, but just know that having your sensitivity high when you're messing with terrain makes it a lot easier to get more natural and realistic angles. As you can see, we're making it too realistic because we're breaking through the ceiling. We're trying to get this thing to be a little bit thick on the outside so that the rocks that we eventually place inside aren't going to be jutting through the surface. Beavers aren't very big animals. I'd say they probably get to about, I don't know, a foot tall on all 4 legs. Not quite sure if that's exactly accurate, but they're certainly not big. So this doesn't have to be huge, nor will the zookeeper actually have to get in here. Maybe to clean a little bit, but they're not going to have to restock anything. I have no plans of putting food in there. We'll get a little bit of an overhang going, hopefully. We can trim it up with rocks later, but for now we're going to have to smooth it, since beavers aren't the best climbers either. They're really good swimmers, but they can't necessarily dig or climb surfaces all too well. To change that, we can just use the smooth terrain feature to make this all smoother, obviously. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the video. This is definitely going to be a long one. I can tell from when I'm recording this is going to be long. I mean, we're probably, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes into the video already, and we haven't even started decorating this thing. This exhibit is pretty ambitious. It's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to turn out, especially for an animal that, I mean, say what you want about them, I really like beavers, but they're not a show stealer like seals, elephants, or anything we could potentially build for. But beavers are special to me in this game, because they're the first ever animal I even attempted to make an exhibit for. The California sea lion was the first one I recorded, but I didn't start doing Planet Zoo YouTube for a couple weeks until after the game came out, and beavers were what I started with. I've done really good in this zoo so far, not using anything from the workshop. However, that's going to change now. I found this fence on there. I forget who made it, sorry if I can't give you credit, but I think this turns out exactly for what we need for this exhibit. I'm a huge fan of it. It's really simple, but it also looks professionally made. It's a lot better than the standard wood barrier that we otherwise would have used. So we're simply just going to use this, and then duplicate it and advanced move it, and then just get this all across this way. I think it looks really nice. The kids can see through it, the adults can see over it, and the beavers can't get out. And realistically, those are the 3 things you need in an exhibit. If you guys like this during the gameplay commentary, I guess you'd call it live commentary instead of primarily post, let me know, because typically all I do live is the intro, and usually the ending too. I never really do this, because typically the footage is sped up to 5 times during the video, so let me know if you like it, and I can keep doing it. One thing that I can promise I'll never do live is the education segment, because that would take absolutely forever. This is probably the longest part in the recording anyways, so that would just be impractical. But let's learn about the North American beaver together. The first thing that everybody knows about beavers is how they're engineering marvels. Beavers are natural builders and create dams out of sticks, mud, and rocks. These dams can be quite large and alter the flow of rivers and streams, which can actually affect some humans in their way of life. Typically in the past, this has resolved in conflict between beavers and man, but as of late, people have worked around it. We even took inspiration from them. Where do you think we learned to control water and make our own dams from? Beavers haven't quite mastered the art of hydroelectricity, which, if you don't know what that is, it's what humans use dams for 9 times out of 10. But beavers do use dams for protection. Aside from their front teeth, called incisors, beavers typically don't have much of a defense against predators, and they have a lot of predators. Wolves, coyotes, other species of dog, bear, even some species of eagles can all hunt the beavers. However, none of these species are bulky enough or intelligent enough to raid a beaver's dam once fully constructed. A beaver inside of its dam is nearly impenetrable from all forms of attack. However, while building their dams, beavers are extremely vulnerable. Like I said, they have no active combat abilities, and to build the dams, they have to use their teeth to knock down trees, which for one causes a lot of noise, and then they have to drag the trees all throughout the forest, which is creating noise the entire way, giving their position away to every single predator in the forest. They're extremely vulnerable while creating their dams, but once fully constructed, they're pretty much safe to do whatever they want inside of there. We glossed over it relatively quickly, but aside from making their dams, beavers' teeth are equally as impressive. Think about how strong your teeth would have to be to bite through a tree. It's not like they do it in one bite, that would be utterly terrifying, but still, put it into perspective. Last week I chipped my tooth on a Stanley Cup. I don't think I could bite through a tree after learning that. Beavers actually have to continuously chip their teeth, otherwise they'll keep growing too big and they'll be too cumbersome to even use. This is because beavers, like all rodents, need to continuously do this. Otherwise their teeth can actually grow so large they'll affect them and even grow into them in painful ways. Then they can't use their teeth at all. And if a beaver can't use its teeth, it can't make a dam and it can't defend itself. Aside from the beaver's teeth, their waterproof fur is among their other most notable features. Beavers have a special gland that secretes oil, which they then spread all over their fur to keep themselves waterproof. This adaptation helps them stay warm and dry in their aquatic environment. Unfortunately, in early American history, the French figured this out first, and the beavers saw the brunt of the fur trade in the early 1800s. Sadly, they were extremely overhunted at the time. However, they're nowhere near vulnerable at this point, and their species have since been thriving, thanks to the dams that they can create to defend themselves and raise their young. It truly is a win-win situation. Beavers don't just engineer their dams, they actually engineer ecology itself. By building their dams, beavers can create an entire new biome called wetlands that provide a habitat for numerous other species, including crocodiles, alligators, fish, birds, insect, and hundreds of thousands of different plant life. Beavers actually help the environment more than you might think. They're crucial to the North American environments. Other animals, like bees or termites, can create complex hives that it's a biome for them specifically that other animals can't access. However, I can't think of a single other animal on Earth that inflicts the environment so much to where they can make an entire new ecosystem, like the wetlands. Beavers are truly excellent creatures for this. In the wild, beavers typically can live for about 10 to 15 years, although they live much longer in captivity. Most beavers meet a premature end to their life due to predators finding them before they can construct their dams. However, in zoos and captivity, this isn't a problem. To combat this, beavers have adapted to become primarily nocturnal in the wild, which means they're most active during the night and spend their days resting in their lodges or burrows, or if they haven't constructed them yet, they'll wait and then do that at night. Beavers live in family groups consisting of a monogamous pair, one adult male and one adult female, and their offspring from the previous year. The young beavers will stay with their parents for about 2 years before they venture out on their own. A beaver's diet consists mainly of tree bark and aquatic plants. They're particularly fond of aspen, willow, and poplar trees. This is why their population thrives in Canada more so than the United States, although they have an extremely sizable population in both regions. Aside from their fur and teeth, the beaver's other most well-known feature is their large, flat tails that serves multiple purposes. They use their tails as rudders while swimming, and as balance while to stand upright on land. Their tail also stores fat reserves to help them survive during the winter. Overall, beavers are truly marvelous creatures and should be protected at all costs due to their wetland creations. We should probably focus on finishing up this exhibit now. It's almost done. Despite Planet Zoo being a sandbox game where you can build your perfectly good dream zoo with every feature you could ever desire in it, one thing that I like to do to make my zoos a little bit more realistic is actually kind of the opposite of that. Now hear me out, because I know it sounds a little counterproductive to make things purposefully look not very good, but realistically speaking, a zoo isn't going to put thousands and thousands of dollars to make the back of an exhibit that guests aren't going to see necessarily eye candy. They're just going to use a simple chain link fence. A $100,000 fence is going to keep in a beaver all the same as a simple chain link fence that they can probably buy for 1% of the cost. I'm going to use this exact same logic here. However, I'm going to blend it in using the rock to make it not look as tall. I think this accomplishes two things. One, it makes the zoo more realistic, like we just said, because they're not going to allocate resources to useless things. And two, it blends it into the environment in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do with null barriers. Otherwise, we just would have been using all rocks, and the beavers potentially could have climbed over it, especially if they had babies. You have to remember with traversable areas that the babies can actually go in different areas that the adults can. This can be a problem if you have animals that are particularly small, like beavers, or even animals like alligators that have a severe size difference between the males, females, and babies. The exhibit's almost done. We're so close. The only thing left to do is make a second guest viewing area, so they're not too hot in the sun when they come to the beaver's above ground viewing. I'm gonna just copy and paste over the one we already made, change the conservation boards obviously, although I think I cut adding those in the first section anyways. We added conservation boards, fun fact. We're just gonna change what they look like. Spoiler alert, later in the video we're gonna get rid of the first one anyways. You'll see why in probably 5 to 10 minutes. It's gonna be a big surprise. I've hinted at it numerous times in the video, but you're gonna really like it. You're gonna get a 2-for-1 special in this video, if I didn't spoil that already somehow. One of my absolute favorite details you can add to a building to make it a little bit more aged are the ivy plants. The beavers may not necessarily like these, but at the same time, technically speaking, this is actually outside of their exhibit. This is the exact same exploit that we used for our flamingos. Remember, the flamingos didn't necessarily like a whole lot of plants in their exhibit, so the way we worked around this was to place the plants outside of the null barrier. This made the flamingos have plants in their exhibit that technically weren't in their exhibit, so it was perfectly fine by them. The beavers may not necessarily like these ivy plants, however, since it's just slightly outside of the null barrier, it works in their exhibit. This is a really good tip if you want to over-decorate exhibits, but the animals are a little bit fussy about what's in there. Just use the null barriers. They're a really good block. Ironically, the last thing that we had to detail up was the first thing that we actually built. We have to give their den a little bit more character. To do this, I used the exact same technique that we used with the wood poles on the glass panes before. However, this time, instead of using wood, we're going to be using stone, and simply using bigger rocks to blend it into the mountain. This is really easy. To do this, just use some big rocks to make a retaining wall around the dirt. You'll find that this is how mountains actually look in real life. It's not just free-forming dirt. There's a lot of rock in there if you look closely. Then, just use the rocks to cover up other areas of the dirt, and make little areas for plants. Cover up any harsh corners, and you're done. Easy as that. After we finished up the indoor viewing and the outdoor viewing, the last thing we had to do with this exhibit was just add a few more key details. The easiest way I found to do this was actually use this plant that I forget the name of, and just put it slightly underground to where it looks like a new piece of grass. The beavers still notice that this is there, and it raises their plant meter. However, living in North America, most North American animals, beavers included, have a high tolerance for any plant. After that, I decided to take some rocks, line the side of their pond with them to make it a little bit more realistic. I added a few areas where they could get in and out. I also added concrete to the bottom of their pond off screen, and I added a few more details to make their habitat just that much more realistic. If you think you've added enough details, add one more, and then you can be done. You know what, guys? Thinking about where the guest height would be in perspective of this exhibit, let's just test something out here. If we were to get rid of some of this ivy and get rid of a layer of the European stone, we could also, let's multi-select this glass, use the Advanced and Duplicate Move tab, move it on the Y-axis, that green one right there, not the blue one, which we just did, put this down. This might actually be perfect. This is completely off script, and I was not planning to do this, but you know what? We're making 2 exhibits in this episode. Let's do some American alligators, too. Remember when I said beavers can actually make their own ecosystems called the Wetlands? Well, they didn't make this one. This is our version of the Wetlands, and it's starring the beavers and the American alligators first and foremost. It's going to be a new sub-area of the North American section of H2O zone. I'm not really sure what other animals we're going to put in here. Definitely the American bullfrog, which is an exhibit animal and would probably take 5 minutes to do. Not going to be in this episode because I don't have a good spot for it, but we'll definitely add that later. The other animal I'm considering adding in here would be the moose, but if you guys have any ideas for the wetlands animals, what else could we add? I'm not quite sure, besides the beavers and the alligators, which we already have. We're going to talk about our alligators in a second, but first let's give a brief overview of the exhibit. Basically what we want to do is have a small glass area. Alligators need exactly the same amount of water as they do land, except they don't need any deep dive. If you remember from our spectacled caiman episode from a while ago in the Center of Primate Conservation, they are very similar animals. Their eyes and nose are also above the surface of the water, so they don't necessarily need to dive deep down. This is what I was alluding to the entire video, if there being a surprise at the end. I hope you guys like it, because typically we only do 1 animal per episode. The only other time we've ever done this was in episode 4 of our very first zoo, which we ended up abandoning just because we've gotten so much better at the game since then. Matter of fact, we had American alligators in that zoo, and that's actually where these are coming from. We imported all of the animals from the old zoo that we started this entire YouTube channel with, so they're actually going to be able to call this home, and hopefully we can do them a much better exhibit this time around. Like I said, this is a very simple exhibit, just using a very small glass barrier that the alligators won't be able to climb out of, hopefully, otherwise our guests are going to be more stressed than our Arctic foxes, and then have a small section of land. It's made of glass so you can see them under the water in case they decide to go down there. But speaking of the animals that are going to call this exhibit home, let's do a mini education segment about the American alligator, since the beavers are the star of this episode. American alligators are the largest reptiles in North America, with a rounded snout and a very dark coloration to help them hide and ambush prey. They can grow up to 15 feet long and weigh as much as 300 pounds. That is not a small animal. Outside of various species of bear, American alligators are probably the most dangerous animal in North America. You could debate that it would be the moose. Despite them being extremely powerful, with a crushing bite, American alligators are actually rather shy animals, and typically avoid contact with humans when possible. American alligator attacks typically occur when an alligator sees something with a human that could be considered prey. Like, for example, if you were walking a dog along the bank of a river, an alligator would be infinite more likely to attack you, as opposed to if you were just walking by yourself making a lot of noise. Alligators are primarily found in the southeastern United States, inhabiting freshwater environments such as marshes, rivers, lakes, swamps, and the wetlands. This is exactly why we decided to add them here in the zoo, right next to the beaver, because if you recall, the beavers make the wetlands, the alligators live in the wetlands. It makes sense. The zoo has a lot of good natural flow due to this. American alligators are strictly carnivorous and primarily feed on fish, turtles, birds, and mammals. They're opportunistic hunters and will eat almost any animal that comes into striking distance that they can swallow. During the breeding season, males make loud bellowing noises to attract females. They build alligator holes in the mud near the water's edge, which provide a nesting site for females and a refuge for other animals during droughts. However, alligators have to defend their eggs on land, which can be rather tricky since they're much more mobile in the water due to their rudder-like tail, which grants them surprisingly swift speed in the water. They're by no means slow on land either, but they're much more adept for quick bursts of speed as opposed to their shocking endurance in the water. Overall, alligators are not a species to be trifled with. Treat them with extreme caution, despite them being shy. Try to avoid them at all costs, and they'll do the same to you. It's not quite there yet, but I can just tell this is going to end up being by far my favorite area of the zoo. The wetlands are an extremely special environment to me since it's how I started Planet Zoo. These were some of the first two animals that I ever made an exhibit for, and as you can see, I did a rather good job with these alligators. They're all 100% happy, have adequate space, and can't get out to attack the guests, despite their fence being shockingly small. This episode is running long as it is, so we'll probably save the rest of this for another small detailing episode. This alligator enclosure was extremely impromptu, and I typically would have made this into a speed build, but I just had to get it done right now during this episode because the idea just came to me. The bulk of this episode was made on the wetlands, as you can see by our sign right there, and it looks like our beavers are actually enjoying their indoor den. I haven't seen them in here so far. We have 2 adult females and 1 juvenile male, so they can't breed yet. I'm sure they will extremely soon. All rodents in Planet Zoo breed very quickly. They're easy to take care of. I'm really happy with how this exhibit turned out though. Let's check out the rest of it. If you'll go down the path, let's see if we can't find where the other beaver is. Looks like he's over there, so we won't get the best view of him so far. But you'll go down this path and enter the first guest viewing area. If you can hear that running water, it's because there's numerous waterfalls in this area. Beavers like to cover up waterfalls with dams, so we tried to mimic that. Just look how cute this guy is in the water. Beavers are some of my favorite animals in this game due to their animations alone. They're so cute, so stubby. Perfect. Planet Zoo knocked it out of the park with these guys. There's our first waterfall though. There's no dam in that one because it would be impractical to build it so big. But my favorite detail by far is how you can actually see the American alligators out the back of the guest viewing area. Sometimes recording live can be a little bit tricky. I'm not editing that one out. If you guys made it this far, have that little goof. Anyways, you go to the top and see the fence that we made of the blueprint after you see the copy and pasted guest viewing area. On top of that, you also have an incredible overhead view of the alligators' enclosure where they'd be on the land. Over here, you can see them clearly from the water, so it's the best of both worlds. The H2O zone is very grateful to have these 2 new aquatic species inside of it. The past few videos we've made, the species haven't necessarily been aquatic, but these 2 definitely are. The wetlands is going to be a great addition to the place. I can already tell. This is definitely thumbnail material. I'm also not editing this out. Yes, I play X-Defiant. It's pretty fun. Free to play. If you're on Xbox or PS5, I highly recommend it. Planet Zoo is not all I do. Hate to spoil the surprise. But it's what I mostly do. This game is such a blast. I'm so happy it's on console. There's their other waterfall though. I also got that from the blueprint. I'm really happy with how it looks too. Although there was a tree inside of it before, so if you guys are going to download it from the workshop, you're going to have to get rid of that if you want to use it the same way I did. Overall, the sun is setting on this episode, and the day in general, so I'm thinking we're going to call it here. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. This is going to be the start of a beautiful new area of the zoo. Coming pretty soon, over here by the bat cave, probably going to be grizzly bears, and to the right of that, I'm thinking we'll do the moose. But that'll be for later. We'll probably go back to the other side of the zoo next. Kingpin out. See you soon.